You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father. For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times.
Protocol 66 must not be discovered by the Jedi.
Yes, Lord Tyrannus.
You must face the gravest of journeys to Morrowind, the ancient homeworld of the Sith. Kill them all.
You're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z and Corey Clubb. Yes, this is the podcast you're looking for. Most definitely.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
Welcome to A Cup of the Clone Wars. Here are your hosts, Dan Zisa and Corey Clubb.
Hi, this is Bryan Young, a big shiny robot full of Sith and StarWars.com, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z and Corey Clubb. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Welcome to A Cup of Clone Wars, where Coffee with Kenobi examines Star Wars The Clone Wars through a critical lens. On today's show, returning guest Bryan Young of Full Sith and Big Shiny Robot joins us to help us discuss this intriguing arc on The Lost One, where we finally get to find out about what is going on and what has happened with Sifo Dyas. Welcome, Bryan.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes, well, we're happy to have you back for another cup of coffee with us, and of course, Corey and I just had the privilege of being on Full of Sith for the first time last week, and that was a heck of a lot of fun.
Wasn't it, though? I enjoyed it, and I keep hearing great things about the conversation, so I must not have bored people too bad.
Yeah, I think you had some high marks, my friend.
Definitely a discussion on Facebook. People chiming in.
There were really people weighing in on their theories about all the things going on with the opinions on Leia, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And almost no two opinions alike, which I find fascinating.
Well, I think one of my favorite things about Star Wars is that there's enough, and I think it's purposeful ambiguity that allows people to fill in blanks and come up with their own answers, and none of them are wrong because we haven't been told otherwise.
Exactly, which helps us to continue to debate and marinate and ruminate. So let's just start off with our first question that we usually ask on A Cup of Clone Wars, which is, what are your overall opinions of this arc? And Bryan, we'll just have you start first. I guess it's not really an arc. At least it's sort of listed as connected with the Yoda arc, but I think that's a very generous comparison.
It is. I really love this arc. I think one of the things that dropped my jaw the first time I saw Attack of the Clones was connecting the dots between Sifo Dyas and Tyrannus and Dooku and what was actually going on. And no one picked that up, really, until this episode, right?
Absolutely.
And so this episode was something I was incredibly excited for. And the Yoda arc in general is interesting, but yes, I think you're right. It's generous to call this a part of the Yoda arc. But this episode's something I really, really loved. The visuals are fantastic. I've been rewatching season 1, and I'm so deep into season 1, I almost forgot how much of a leap the animation takes.
Oh, it's night and day.
Because I rewatched this episode for this episode, and it was just stunning. That sandstorm at the beginning. I think this is the first time. I mean, we've been promised sandstorms in Star Wars movies from Return of the Jedi, and they tried it a little bit in Phantom Menace, and we never really got it. We got a little bit of taste of it in Attack of the Clones, but I think this is the first time that really nailed the sandstorm idea visually.
And this is the first clip we'd ever seen, wasn't it, for season 6? Or was it when this from the Order 66 arc? I feel like this was the first one.
The first scene I was pretty sure the first scene that we saw was the clone walking up and executing one of those twin Jedi.
Yeah.
Oh, that's probably true.
I can't quite remember. I remember watching it in my classroom.
Did it start off with Qui-Gon Jinn's voice, didn't it?
No, that was what they had on USA Today.
Okay.
Yeah. It was Tip Lee and Tiplar, by the way. The two Jedi, the twins, the one that was executed. So So Corey, what is your overall opinion on this particular episode? Yeah, this is the only Cup of Clone Wars where we've just talked about one show, and I think this one is incredibly rich, as Bryan was saying.
Yeah, there's a lot to marinate on, as you guys said, and I think it's interesting. It's to call it an arc. It's almost like a prequel to the next two episodes. I guess that kind of I saw it was kind of like maybe more to do with Yoda and his quest, if you will. To me, it had a lot. I have to rewatch it a couple more times now just to get to after our discussions. I'm sure we'll bring out a lot of things I'm going to go back and watch for, but it was kind of like a lot in a 22-minute episode. I was like, wow, there's a lot going on here as far as the plot and tying it in with the films themselves and kind of some of the bigger issues. And that's what I've noticed with all these episodes of this last season 6 that have been really tying up a lot of loose ends and really tying you back into the films. And I've really enjoyed that.
And there's so much adrenaline in this. It's a slow build, and then the adrenaline just kicks in with another spectacular lightsaber duel at the end. And Count Dooku at his most vicious, probably the most vicious we've seen him. I guess you could debate that, but he really comes across. And as Bryan said at the beginning of our show, this one sets the table for us in a lot of ways, but I think it leaves us with even more questions. And the first one that I want to look at is the whole mystery of the clone army. And this is for all of us, of course. And Bryan, you mentioned the ambiguity. When you think about the clone army and how it was explained in episode 2 and finally fleshed out, so to speak, for this particular episode, the Lost One, would you say, if you were on a game show and they said, Mystery of the Clone Army after seeing episode 2 and the Lost One, unclear, undeveloped, or ambiguous by design?
I think the word I'd use to describe it is insidious. And that's not supposed to be a pun on Darth Sidious.
Right,
but
it just works.
It's something that is created to cause a convenience for the Jedi and the Republic. And it's rooted in the dark side. War, in general, is rooted in the dark side. And this is what's so meticulous about Sidious's plan, in that he is going out of his way to force the Jedi. I think the last scene where Yoda's like, well, not only are we not going to do anything about this, knowing full well that Dooku was behind the clone army, which we use, that we're interacting with every day. Not only are we not going to do anything about it, we're going to keep this a secret. We're going to keep this amongst ourselves because we can't possibly do anything about it because we're too far into this. And that's something that's the Jedi selling out their ideals
constantly.
Yeah, they have to make more and more bargains with themselves and their dogma in order to survive even another day in this new status quo that Sidious keeps creating. And it leads to their downfall. But what other choice do they have?
For story-wise, you're going to say ambiguous then?
Well, I don't think it's ambiguous. I think this episode helps us connect the dots in a more clear way than we've ever seen before, in that the clone army was very clearly the work of Sidious and Dooku. The surprise there is, though, that they started this, they put these wheels in motion before Palpatine was even the Chancellor.
Yes.
That they went back to Finis Valorum was so surprising. This is one of my favorite moments. I really love Phantom Menace, probably more than anybody. And I loved how they came back to that, and Valorum specifically. And it makes you realize how brilliant Sidious was, that he was putting all these pieces on the table when no one knew that there was a table to need pieces on.
And he looks, the animation, he looks like Terrence Stamp, and it's a very excellent likeness.
Yeah, and the voice is very right too.
Yeah, it's great. And if memory serves, Terrence Stamp does not speak very highly of the prequels. Is that correct?
Well, he's been misinformed. I would love to have a conversation with Mr. Stamp about the prequel.
Oh man, about anything.
No, yeah, absolutely about it. To be honest, if I were to sit down and talk to Terrence Stamp about anything, it probably would be as much about Superman and the Limey as it would be Star Wars. But
you're the only person I know besides my family that likes the Limey. I think the Limey's terrific.
I love that movie. There's such an unrestrained rage.
Yes.
To that makes me laugh about his performance, and it makes me laugh in that nervous way that I might cry if I don't laugh. But the thing that I love about this episode, though, is that it legitimizes so many things about the prequels that people seemed to think they had a problem with, and it does it in such an elegant and beautiful way, and it gives us all kinds of stuff to grasp onto. It gives us a new race of aliens that sound cool. I mean, it's barely noticeable. You can't notice it unless you know that Matt Lanter is the voice of that main Pike.
I didn't know that.
That's cool.
Wow.
So they sound really cool and they look really cool, and
they're like almost a stone anthropomorphic gargoyle.
Yeah, or I don't know, like mixed with an insect,
Egyptian-like almost, kind of.
Yeah, almost like what is it, Star Quest or whatever?
Yeah, that's what Stargate.
Stargate, yeah, whatever. I don't know.
So it gives us that, but it adds to the layers of what Sidious's plan is. It gives us what is probably the final confrontation between Obi-Wan and Anakin and Dooku, which it's very easy for me to believe that Anakin's powers have doubled since this time.
I was going to ask you about that too.
Well, and so much of that is arrogance on Anakin's part too.
Oh, constantly.
But it really, there's a lot to love in this episode, and there's really not anything to dislike, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Corey, what about you? Unclear, undeveloped, or ambiguous by design when you look at the whole mystery of the clone army?
I think it's ambiguous. I mean, at this point, I think we're still kind of deciding what's going on, and everybody kind of has their ideas, I think, behind it. But like Bryan said, I mean, it's just so cool to see Sidious put the players on the map there, and he's had these players in motion for a long time. Like you said, you did that flashback. Well, not flashback. It was a kind of a callback to Chancellor Valorum and his time. And it's interesting to see these characters called up again, because it makes me want to throw episode 1 back on it and really kind of take it from there and fit in the pieces. As far as the clone army, I mean, you just look at the planning, and I can't help but look at Darth Plagueis, the novel. I can't help bring that up. It always pops in my mind with these background things of Sidious and him kind of making his way up the chain of his grand scheme and grand plan, and like you said too, it's pretty awesome to see all this happen in one episode. I mean, this could have been drawn out between, I'd say, 3 or 4 different episodes and really give it a lot of beef to look at. But they've done a good job of storytelling, I think, to be able to piece this together and give us some new nuggets to look at and just gloss over. And again, the animation is really well done, and music is well done. I'm excited by each episode. But the clone army is it's ambiguous by design. I think it's because everybody can kind of look at it a different way, and they didn't really. I mean, they kind of pinned it at the end there on. I'm coming up short.
Sifo Dyas.
Yeah, and it seems like they were at the end. They kind of like you made a great idea there, Bryan, about the Jedi just kind of crumbling a little bit, and it's just. I almost, like you said, want to go back and watch episodes 1 and 2 and just watch it crumble, and just like you can see that they're falling apart because they're so, confused and not sure what to do, and now they're questioning the clone army themselves, and it's fascinating to see that happen.
Well, I'm going to pull a Bobby Roberts and say that watching the Jedi fall apart is almost like a very slow motion Jenga game where the Jedi Temple is Jenga, because just the continual crumbling. I'm going to say that for the mystery of the clone army, I feel like in episode 2, it made me think, and it almost made my head hurt trying to figure out what in the heck was going on. And there was a part of me that felt like there was some editing where some things were left on the cutting room floor, so to speak, and it just was a little bit vague. And then we get this episode, and it answers a lot of questions, but it introduces a few more questions about Sifo Dyas that I find intriguing. But before we get on to Sifo Dyas, and Bryan, you may have a follow as well, I do want to point out something that Corey said about Palpatine climbing up the chain. That was maybe no more apparent than when Yoda comes out of his meeting with the Chancellor and Obi-Wan says, "Did you have any success with the Chancellor?" And Yoda says, "As much as usual, I'm afraid." Or maybe that was Mace. Was that Mace? Or was it Obi-Wan?
I don't remember.
I can't. I wrote down Obi-Wan, so I'm just going to trust my pencil. But how interesting that Yoda, we're seeing that scrutiny, that skepticism about Palpatine right off the bat.
Well, I think it makes sense. I mean, if you look to Obi-Wan's sort of soliloquy about how unusual Palpatine is, I mean, Obi-Wan's been distrustful of Palpatine from the beginning. You'll remember in Attack of the Clones when they're on after Anakin gives his "I'd rather be dreaming about Padme" speech, they get into politics, and Obi-Wan says, like, Palpatine's just like the others. I notice he's very careful at watching the passions and prejudices of other senators.
Yes.
And then when he gives his speech in Revenge of the Sith, where he tries to convince Anakin that something is out of place with the Chancellor, it's obvious that he's been harboring these feelings for a long time. And this helps bridge those two different points of views of Obi-Wan.
How do you guys feel? This is a bit of a aside. How do you feel about Palpatine's voice here? Clearly, they had to switch because Mr. Abercrombie passed on. But how do you feel about? I still, even though who knows if Tim Curry will show up as Palpatine, I still can't quite buy him as Palpatine. He's got the right kind of growl going on, but I don't know. It still throws me off.
I'm into it, actually. I think it was a very smart move to try to. I mean, I'm sure they could have said, like, "Hey, D. Bradley Baker, just do your Ian Abercrombie impersonation," but they went with someone who would have a different feel. So as not, I think it's actually a matter of respect too that they didn't try to have him just come in and do what Ian Abercrombie did. They had him go back to Ian McDiarmid and had him come up with his own interpretation of what that character would be like. And I think it worked for me. If I can separate from myself,
Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I don't think I've ever watched that all the way through. I never really enjoyed that movie all that much.
I've never seen it, actually. I just know he's. I saw him on Broadway for Spamalot.
Yeah. I mean, I've enjoyed Tim Curry and his performances, and I think his voice has the right cadence. And I think that if we would have started the series with Tim Curry, no one would have had an issue. But that we have Ian Abercrombie as a baseline,
true.
I think that's what causes the disconnect with it.
Absolutely.
And seeing that scene where he talks to Yoda, and I guess I was trying to think about, because I knew he had done the voiceover work for it, and I wasn't really certain on what episode it was for certain, but I liked it. I mean, I liked Tim Curry a lot. I think he's a really great character actor, a great actor, great voiceover actor, and I guess it didn't dawn on me until you said something, Dan, that I was like, oh yeah, I guess that would have been his voice, because it did feel a little bit off, but it felt like it was.
Well, he was in the Order 66 arc. Of course, he was in the Ahsoka arc at the end of season 5, and then this, and as far as I can tell, I think that's the only time we hear his voice.
I think so.
I think there's another episode.
There may be. I just can't think what it might be. Unless maybe it's the Disappeared Part 1 with Jar Jar and Mace.
Possibly.
Oh, yeah.
I think. Well, no, he also did that final arc with Ahsoka.
Yeah, I mentioned that one
in season 5.
Yeah, he was in the very last episode.
I think the thing is that, like, when I was watching this episode, like, for the first line, I'm like, oh, right, this is a Tim Curry episode. But by the time he's force choking Dooku from across the galaxy.
Oh, that was awesome.
I'm on board. I'm just like, my God, I forgot that Sidious was that powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's little things there that are sort of left unsaid that make you wonder. I think this is actually a really good indication of how powerful Luke Skywalker might be in episode 7.
Oh, that's a great point.
Another point to make too is like you said, this is the last sequence we see of Obi-Wan and Anakin fight Dooku before you see Episode 3, and it's almost like, was that the breaking point where Palpatine or Sidious was kind of like, well, I'm done with him. We'll have one more last run, and
I think he's always doing sort of like the survival of the fittest, and he thought, well, I'm going to have him try to kill Dooku, and if Dooku gets out of it, all right, I guess my plans for Anakin will go somewhere else, and Dooku's stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think Palpatine had honestly been planning on Anakin from the beginning.
Oh, definitely.
I think there's like 3 key indications. For one, the hint that Darth Plagueis spurred the midichlorians somehow to create Anakin, which, again, perfect ambiguity. I'm so glad they didn't spell that out or make it explicit one way or the other. But I think that's one. And he's aware of that. So even if it's not explicitly known to Palpatine that Anakin could have been was conceived by the midichlorians and that was a result of Plagueis's teachings or experiments, that he knows that that's possible is fascinating to me. For 2, there's obviously the line at the end of Phantom Menace where he says, and you, young Skywalker, will watch your career with great interest.
Oh, yeah.
And then the last one is the scene in Attack of the Clones, where he's having that quiet moment with Anakin and they're walking side by side just like Palpatine and Vader do.
Beautiful shot.
In Return of the Jedi. But also, actually, there's a 4th moment too, and it's right after Anakin's killed Dooku, and Palpatine says, it's natural. You wanted revenge. Mm-hmm. He cut off your arm, and this isn't the first time this has happened. Yeah. Remember what you told me about the Sand People? And that implies to me that he's been that friend to Anakin.
Oh, yeah. He's a serpent in the garden.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And so I think Palpatine had been planning on that for a long time.
Oh, I agree. I think he wanted that from the very, very beginning, but I also feel like even though he wants it, he's so strong in the Force and confident that if Anakin were to somehow be terminated, that he would just roll with Dooku for a while and just figure somebody else would show up. It'd be kind of, which would ruin, of course, the original trilogy, but he just seems he's just so laid back. And how could you not feel confidence if you're Palpatine? Because how many balls does he have in the air, and everything seems to land right where he wants it to. So he's like he's got control over everything.
It would be. I don't think Palpatine ever wanted Dooku necessarily as his apprentice. I think
no, he was just a gap.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, heck, he's got how many others hanging out? Ventress.
But I find Dooku so interesting. People tell me, "Oh, it was so bad that Maul was there because Maul was so cool and he died, and then Dooku was kind of cool, but he died." But I think Maul and Dooku, when you take them together and take out all of the cons of both of them and add all of their strengths, you have Darth Vader. So with Maul, you have that vicious attack dog who's the strongest and most powerful, but he's not very politically savvy, although he gets to that point a little bit through the Clone Wars. And then with Dooku is an elegant fighter, but he's by no means an attack dog. He's politically savvy. He knows what the situation is. He knows what the play is, and he's plotting every bit as much as Sidious. And then,
he's much more elegant, too.
Yeah, no,
very much like Sir Alec.
And then you get to Anakin, who is the best of both of those worlds. He's savvy enough to know what the play is, but not necessarily ambitious enough to make one of his own. And he's got that vicious strength to him that Maul had. And so Maul and Dooku, I think they were there to show us how good of an apprentice, how that Anakin could be, how perfect of an apprentice he was for Sidious.
Well, and they're also excellent foils too for Vader as well, hence the comparison. So let's jump over to Sifo Dyas. Sifo Dyas, perhaps the most enigmatic character in the prequel trilogy. We don't even see him, and now at least we get canonical images of him. So what is your opinion of Sifo Dyas after seeing Episode 2 and how he's fleshed out? Because after seeing Episode 2, he appears to be very much a victim, and then at the end, you feel like, no, he's actually not a victim. He was evil too. What do you think, guys? Corey, let's start with you.
Yeah, I remember that scene from Episode 2 and it playing out in my mind as I watched this, and it's almost kind of like yeah, as this kind of unraveled in front of me, I didn't know much about him. I was trying to recall in my mind, but again, it is much a mystery of his, who he kind of was working for at the time, and it comes out to be that, he was more evil than we thought, and yeah, it's fleshed out kind of like in a mystery still. Still at the end, it's almost kind of unclear to the Jedi too that he did some bad things, and now he made this clone army for us to use, and now that basically an evil cloned army for that we're using here, and so it's interesting, I guess, as his character. I'd like to know more of why the decisions he made and the reasons he did those things, and they keep that under wraps too. And his obviously is like his friendship, I want to say, with Count Dooku. Did you call that a friendship if it was?
I mean, they were certainly compatriots. I don't know if they were friends, but is anyone the Sith friends?
Maybe not, yeah.
I don't know. But I think one of the most interesting moments in this episode, though, is when Dooku says, I told you the truth all those years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got the only person telling the truth through the entire movie. Dooku never tells a lie. Period.
Yeah, and he says that, yeah.
And at the end of this movie, or at the end of this episode, you've got Yoda saying, like, not only do we have to lie, we have to lie to everybody. You lie, and you lie, and you lie, and I'm going to lie, and we're all liars. And what does that say?
I still feel like, though, he's still being a bit shifty, because he does tell the truth, but he doesn't tell the whole truth. He leaves out particular details of just how deep this goes and the evil nature of his soul, which again we see on full parade here, especially with the way he commits murder at the end too.
But I really believe, I mean, he reiterates his offer to Obi-Wan. I wish you'd have joined me then.
Well, sure.
The Sith
are so great at that. It's just that, again, I can't help but go back to the Old Testament. They're just perfect the way they tantalize and offer up everything. It's great.
But I think Sifo Dyas, for his part, though, I really do believe he could have been just an innocent bystander. And he was good enough to be on the Jedi Council, at least according to Lama Su.
Didn't Mace Windu say something like he was on the council and he just didn't agree with their...
Yeah, before the blockade of Naboo. Yeah,
so it seems like council. Even then, I even think back to Count Dooku was a Jedi and he had, obviously butted heads with the Jedi and just didn't see all their beliefs and all what they're were doing was the right thing. And it seems like this is kind of a similar case.
Well, then
why?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but why would Valorum send him on a mission with one of his personal advisors if...
Because there's underworld connections, right? That's what that's what the story. That's what he tells.
Yeah, but but it's like he was still trusted enough to fulfill the needs of the Republic as a whole, and maybe that was that quiet sort of revolution. I don't think the clone army was specifically Sifo Dyas' idea. I really do think that in my head, what happened is that Sifo Dyas was a little bit disaffected, and Dooku and Sidious saw that and latched onto that, knew that they could kill him, assume his place, and that if it came back to them, they would know, well, Sifo Dyas was a little bit crazy in the head, and they wouldn't think twice about it. That, okay, yeah, Sifo Dyas was disaffected, Sifo Dyas had his problems with the Jedi Order, and this kind of makes sense for where his headspace was when he was killed.
He also, do you think at the end then that he was in fact evil the whole time and not just sort of duped along? I mean, it seems like they're pretty straightforward about that.
I never got the impression that Sifo Dyas was evil more than he was disillusioned and lied to and killed before he could do anything about it.
That's fair. I mean, do you think he knew he was involved with the Sith?
I don't think so. Maybe not.
I don't know. I thought I knew, and then now we're talking about this.
I know. It makes me think about it some more. Thanks a lot, Brian. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, the Sith, they knew that there was something missing, right? They knew they killed a Sith.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know if they killed the master. They didn't know if they killed the apprentice. I mean, Darth Maul, by all appearances, seemed young, and they had no idea whether he was old or young, right? And at the point where Dooku reveals himself as a Sith Lord...
Great scene, too.
At the point where he reveals himself as a Sith Lord, it could be... I mean, Dooku could be the Sith Lord that they've been looking for without... I mean, he's aged. He's quite aged. And Maul was very young, and certainly younger than Dooku was at the time of the invasion of Naboo. So for the Jedi, they could be thinking to themselves, like, Dooku was lying. There is no other Sith Lord. He's the Sith Lord. He's a politician. He's always been a politician. And that Maul was his apprentice. And so that the other person they were looking for, you know, it puts things in a different light completely if they think that Dooku is the master, or if Maul, if they think he's the master, which they don't know. I mean, his apprentice could be 10 for all they know.
Right.
You know, I don't think anybody knows anything. They just know that there's the shroud of the dark side somewhere, and it clouds everything.
Well, how about that line at the end when the leader of the Pike says someone who wanted to be Sifo Dyas? Very poignant sentence.
Well, I think that's definitely Dooku. I think that's definitely Dooku.
Yeah.
I think they pretty
Why would
much...
he want to be just to take on the persona to make this deal come through, or what is he trying to say? Because the state of being is an interesting concept.
I think, for me personally, I think that this sequence of events is actually pretty well laid out in Attack of the Clones, where you have the Kaminoans thinking that Sifo Dyas is the person who ordered the army, but they don't have much experience with the Jedi. So little experience, in fact, that anytime anyone shows up in a Jedi robe, they're like, hey, you guys are here. Awesome. Here's our army. You know, they don't even think twice about it when Obi-Wan shows up. So when Dooku shows up and says, hey, I'm Sifo Dyas, it's not like they're checking his ID. But
right.
Jango Fett knows a little bit more about that. So Dooku introduces himself actually as Tyrannus. And so when I loved how it took you at least twice watching Attack of the Clones to catch that Jango said, I was recruited by a man called Tyrannus on one of the moons of Bogdan. And then the only other indication, they only say Tyrannus twice in that movie. And it's once when Jango says it, and it's once when Palpatine says, welcome home, Lord Tyrannus.
At the end.
Movie.
Yeah.
And so you have to watch it twice, and that mystery gels a little bit after that second viewing. And I think this just sort of solidifies that Dooku slayed Sifo Dyas to impersonate him, again, to fool the Jedi. So when the Jedi show up and say, where the hell did these clones come from? And they said, well, Sifo Dyas ordered them. And they say, well, yeah, he was a little bit off his rocker. That doesn't sound too far off base.
I always felt like Sifo Dyas was, like you said, it was someone who was actually there, and then Dooku impersonated him. That's at least when I watched episode 2.
And I mean, because if they would have said, like, if Lama Su would have said, no, this army's for the Jedi, it was ordered by a dude named Darth Tyrannus, Obi-Wan wouldn't have had any doubts that something fishy was up, and Mace Windu would have never said to Yoda, go ahead and go get that clone army. Never. That never would have happened.
No,
it
definitely
had to
not.
have been a Jedi. Because that was a layer to the plan. He could have gone and ordered the army under the name Tyrannus. He could have ordered it under Count Dooku. It didn't matter to the Kaminoans who he was, but that was the longevity of Sidious's plan, that he had to take over a Jedi so that when the Jedi eventually find it, it seems at least a little bit like they're on their side.
Yes, and which we go ahead, Corey.
Well, I was going to say in the first episode of this season, we're on, you know, kind of going more into the depths of the clone army or the clones themselves, and it seems like the Kaminoans were kind of Kaminoans. Sorry, they seem like they're little.
It's okay. These Kaminoans, they keep to themselves.
I've never heard anyone say Darth Tyrannus until you started saying it tonight.
I just, it's all the movies.
It's just your Britishness.
I always felt like that they were kind of like neutral in a sense, and they just like you said, Kaminoans. So it felt like even that first 1 or 2 episodes of this season, they were talking to Darth Sidious. Was it Darth Sidious? No, it was Tyrannus, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they don't, like you said, they don't really care who it's coming from. So I think if it would have been Sifo Dyas or Tyrannus or whoever, I think there's like, oh, this is our job.
Right. Well, and speaking of jobs, when Yoda reacts to Palpatine, Palpatine continued to pull this massive job over the Jedi. You've got the politics of the Senate versus the code of the Jedi, and in the conversations that they have with each other, just in the fact that there are sealed records that Jedi aren't privy to, that's a mystery in itself. But you still have to continue to ask this question: if the Jedi are peacekeepers, why are they aligned with the government so closely where they become a military police force, albeit on the side of good, although we clearly see that Palpatine tries to use that to make people think the Jedi are bad, hence the ability to eradicate them.
That's something I think that Sidious planned on.
Yeah.
If you go back to Phantom Menace and hear Sidious's reaction to Valorum secretly dispatching Jedi to deal with the trade conflict and the blockade of Naboo, he's not happy about it. And it's something that had to be done in secret. It's something that wasn't expected by the Trade Federation, and it doesn't seem as though it's expected by Sidious, although Sidious acts surprised when just about everything happens, which is part of how keenly tuned into the plans he is. He lets people know what they need to know, when they need to know it, no further. But it seems like that's the beginning of it. And when you hear how they talk about it, Qui-Gon tells Padme as they're about to go back and take Theed, like, I can only protect you. I can't fight this war for you. Mace Windu at the beginning of Attack of the Clones reminds Palpatine, like, we're keepers of the peace. We're not soldiers. And this is this attitude where they keep getting drawn in further and further and further, even though it's completely unintentional on their part, that I think that it is a very new role for them, and they don't know how to react to that.
And so then you have to, and this is maybe a question for an entire series of shows, to be honest, but so the Jedi pattern, the Jedi ideology, clearly flawed. It's like they're setting themselves up to be something that a human being can't possibly be.
Well, they were that for 1,000 generations.
So that's what we've been told, but surely they've run into some pushback along the way, and now Palpatine somehow has figured out how to pull the thread to unravel the whole thing. Pretty brilliant.
I think it's part of his plan, like you said, Brian. It's all set up to unravel them and make them second guess themselves and just throw doubt out there, and it's this basically the whole prequel era is unraveling and the fall of the Jedi. I mean, that was part of his plan, and I think you relate it to the Senate coming in and marking off files and things like that. That you can see that he's just
Valorum,
he's stepping in a little bit to maybe not trust the Jedi all so much and dip in their code and make them second guess their rights. So,
well, I got to jump in here real quick, Brian. I hate to interrupt you, but Obi-Wan is the one who says, "For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi naturally guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic." Right? This is his big recruiting pitch. This is his sales pitch to Luke Skywalker. He doesn't have to work very hard at it because Luke is ready. He's ready for his Joseph Campbell moment, right? This is also the same character, and I love Obi-Wan Kenobi. Heck, look, what's the name of our podcast? But this is also the character where people say that Obi-Wan is not to be trusted. He lies to Luke Skywalker. Technically, yes, he didn't tell the entire truth, but it was a smart thing for protection and for safety. Is it possible that all this time in the desert, he's figured out that the Jedi code was flawed? Well, I guess you could say he probably hasn't figured out until Luke brings balance to the Force. So I may have answered my own question, but maybe he's overgeneralizing the impact the Jedi had for over 1,000 years. If this is the kind of trouble that they run into, it's just the same thing. You're keepers of the peace. I can only protect you. I can't fight a war for you. And then Yoda, the greatest Jedi of all, attacks a planet with an army. Now it's to rescue some Jedi, but this is very militant.
Well, I mean, and in Yoda's defense, and this is why I think it was so important for Sidious to use droids for the Separatists, in that, I mean, who cares if you marshal a million clones against a droid army, which is why I think story arcs like the Onderon arc are so important, or the Mon Cal Corran War, where you have actual people that are at risk and at stake on both sides. But it didn't start that way. And it didn't start that way because Sidious needed the Jedi to wade their toes in just a little bit and get them set up for war before they started. You know, it's one thing to slaughter a droid, and now this is the role we have, and we're slaughtering these droids. But now the Separatists are using people. You know, it makes it so that they're already 3/4 of the way there. How can they stop?
True. What do you think, Corey? The Jedi they're just sort of this episode kind of typifies how they're between a rock and a hard place. And then at the end, which I'm going to get to later, and Bryan has touched on, it just makes you think, makes you scratch your head even more.
Right, and you made the comment there with Kenobi kind of recruiting Luke Skywalker and making that comment, and I think that was their ideals were to do that all along. That was, you know, keeping the peace and not, you know, trying to be warriors and just trying to make things for the good. And I think like I've been saying this entire time, it's like it's unraveled in these episodes as we've seen. I don't think he was trying to gloss over it in episode 4 talking to Luke at all, but
no, I don't think so either. I just want to stir the pot. The pot.
Well, the other thing too is like that's Luke's journey. Then, you know, I mean, that's
right.
That's what he's setting Luke on this new path, saying, you know, we tried to do the best we could, and look where it got us. I mean, he's got to know the history of what went on in some respects, but it's almost like now, you know, not to throw it all on at once, but, you know, it's like you're the next generation of Jedi, and we screwed up, and
right.
You know, good luck.
Before we completely change gears, let's talk about Suman a little bit. And clearly, he's lost his mind. It's the classical archetype of the POW. He's got the bugs on. You know, he's unkept, unshaven, and then he's about to reveal everything, and he's brutally murdered. Let's talk about him a little bit and his impact on this particular episode.
It reminded me of, oh man, what's that guy from Dracula? Like the Dracula's like little
Renfield.
Renfield, yeah, where he goes crazy in the
film, yeah.
In the film, yeah. I don't think he's in the book version. Is that right?
Oh yeah, he sure is.
Is he?
Yeah. He's a great character.
Well, he's familiar with the world as it works, but that's a different concept.
Yeah.
That's what it reminded me of when he's locked up.
He does eat
and
bugs. I like that. That's a great comparison because Renfield in the novel, he's trying to he wants lives. He doesn't want souls. But that's talk about a tangent. Go ahead.
Well, I just bring that up. That's when I first saw that scene. He was obviously crazy and I didn't know what's going on in the sense, but you know He dies abruptly. Obviously, he kind of knew that was going to work up to that. I knew that he was going to die somehow before we're spoiling everything. But it's interesting to see somebody who's gone crazy enough and been imprisoned for so long.
The feeling I got I kind of felt like he was a little bit of a tool, that red herring, that breadcrumb
Yes.
they were allowed to follow. And he was almost more of a MacGuffin. And the reason I really liked him is that as soon as he was about to reveal everything they wanted him to reveal, Dooku killed him. He was an excellent plot device in that he allowed them to put all the pieces together. He brought the bad guy to them right at the correct moment. And just as he's about to let everything spill, Dooku kills him, and it turns into one of the coolest lightsaber duels we've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely.
He was completely utilitarian, but he was interesting. And I honestly don't even think it almost doesn't matter if Filoni and team knew what he was going to say had Dooku let him live.
Right.
Because that was not for us to know.
Well, it seems like he's going to send the Sith or something of that nature, I would think, or Palpatine. Who knows? I feel like he would have revealed it, don't you? I mean, otherwise, why would Sidious go through all that trouble and strangle Count Dooku from across the galaxy if it wasn't urgent to him?
If it was so urgent, why couldn't Sidious just strangle him?
Well, that's not as fun.
That's true.
He's got it. That's got to be more epic for when he goes after Savage Opress.
Well, and it's not like he could. It's not
stroll
like
in.
Sidious couldn't necessarily stroll in personally, and I get the impression that Sidious would need that personal connection to know where they are and to be seeing them in order to grasp them through the Force, even a galaxy away. And it's not like anybody knew exactly where Silman was.
True.
It was he's on that planet somewhere, maybe, and Palpatine might not have had any personal connection with him, and
he probably forgot about it. To be honest, I mean, he knows that ship was shot down. So he probably just assumed everyone went down on the ship. I mean, he's a little overconfident, of course.
And he doesn't tell Dooku, hey, go kill the Silman guy. He says, they're asking questions about this. Go mop up everything there is to mop up about it.
And was anyone disappointed that Sifo Dyas died kind of unceremoniously, just being shot out of the sky?
It's better than a blind guy with a stick.
That's funny.
I mean, that's how Plo Koon goes too, which I think is ironic.
Yeah, you're right. I never thought about that connection.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah.
That's probably not by accident, considering he was at the beginning. And we see the Wolfpack troopers, too.
I love it. Every time you talk to Filoni about Plo Koon, though, it's like you don't actually see his ship crash completely. He didn't make it. He could have made it out.
I'm not quite dead.
I would not be surprised if we got Plo Koon surviving in Rebels.
That would be awesome.
That'd be cool.
Then we get more James Arnold Taylor, too. Okay, so I want to move on to the end, and Bryan pretty much nailed it early on, but Yoda and Mace in the council at the end, they discover that their enemy creates the clone army. So they want to keep it out of the history of all this because they feel strongly. Yoda says, look, I trust these clones. They've saved our lives, Mace, multiple times. And then the most fascinating part of maybe this entire episode is Yoda says, I'm not sure if this is the right path, but it's the only path. Okay, that's an absolute, right? He also says they're designed by the Dark Lord and they must play his game for now, this whole plan. And I realize that it's like poker. You're trying to get everybody to play all their cards. That's a very, very dangerous proposition when you're talking about the entire galaxy. But let's go back to Yoda. This is the only path. Really? An intelligent, wise Jedi Master like Yoda only sees one path? Again, that's an absolute.
I think he's meaning at this point right now that we've had this information, this is the only path we can take right now. Let's try to find a different path or, along the way. I didn't necessarily was like, this is the way we have to go no matter what. And
well, he's pretty specific. And Corey, you like Batman, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Does Bruce Wayne ever find only one way?
No, in multiple ways.
Of course not.
The way you don't.
So maybe he could have consulted Batman. I don't know. Bryan, is this an absolute?
I don't necessarily think so. I think that I think this is one of those situations where it's like it is a binary situation. Do we reveal that we know the Sith created the clone army, or do we not? And with Yoda, they have this very specific worry that it will erode all confidence in the Jedi if they do reveal that. And the Jedi can't lose that confidence, otherwise they won't be able to conduct themselves for their original mission, for the war. They won't be able to do anything. They'll be powerless to do that, and they'll be run out of town. And so I think that it's more like Yoda's saying, like, we could take this other path and it might be harder, but it's not going to save as many people. Like, this is the path we'll need to take in order to continue doing the most amount of good. And I can't argue with him about that.
But then doesn't this further put the magnifying glass on the fact that what the Jedi are doing are wrong, and it's going to take Luke Skywalker years and years later to try to right the ship for them?
That's why I love it.
It propels the plot forward.
Yeah.
And it also makes you say, come on, guys.
Yeah.
Come on.
I was going to say, we talked about Sidious having this this plan in place for a number of years and moving the chess pieces, and everything's working out to his plan. He's got these great moves he's making, and you always wonder too, is like, does Yoda have his own plan? And it's like he's moving his pieces around and just waiting for the right time to make the Jedi better. Maybe they have to fall before they have to get better. I don't know.
Well, the
like
thing is
a
that
forest where you have to burn down the forest and strengthen it up again.
Maybe.
I don't think Yoda is actually making long-term plans until Revenge of the Sith.
True.
Right.
It's not until he says, okay, we're going to confront... Well, he doesn't even... It's like, it's not until he gets into the car with Bail Organa that he starts thinking in that long-term manner.
Right.
Everything else is like, you go kill Anakin, I'll go kill Palpatine, everything will be okay. We'll straighten this out right now. And when he realizes that that's not an issue, that's when he says, I'll go into exile and we'll figure this out and we'll do it right. And I don't think, like, Yoda's just so tapped into the Force. It's something it's a push-pull that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan illustrated at the beginning of Phantom Menace. The first lines they have in Phantom Menace, that Obi-Wan is centering on his anxieties and he's not keeping his focus here and now. And it's something that Yoda's the one who told him he should be mindful of the future. And Qui-Gon, and I think Qui-Gon was probably quoting Yoda verbatim when he said, not at the expense of the moment. And Yoda was living in the moment.
Always.
And it wasn't, he says that in Empire too, a Jedi shouldn't be always looking to the future of the horizon. His focus should be here and now. And it wasn't until Revenge of the Sith that Yoda snapped out of that and said, if we're going to play him, if we're going to beat him, we have to play his game.
Well, you also think too, the notion that I'm interested more, and this is, I think we're a bit all over the place more than we usually are in a couple of Clone Wars, because this episode opens up so many different little pockets of conversation that are just rich. I love the idea, and Bryan, you kind of reminded me of this just now too. The fact that Yoda and Obi-Wan, and I'm fast forwarding to Return of the Jedi now, they appear to think that the only way to end this evil is the great myth of redemptive violence to achieve your goals. And it takes Luke Skywalker to be patient, to literally throw away his weapon, to put down this aggressive notion that the Jedi can't do during the Clone Wars, which shows why Luke is, in fact, the New Hope. He's definitely the one that restores balance to the Force. In this conversation about when they say there is another, and of course it's got to be Leia, but it's really Luke that is the one that helps restore everything.
Well, I think Luke is the conduit. I think
for Anakin, yes.
That is a whole different rabbit hole of conversation.
I know it is.
And that is what I loved about these later episodes of Clone Wars. They brought us down those rabbit holes and they allowed us to explore it, and they allowed us to see different shades of things. We have absolutely mentioned every single Star Wars movie. And that's something remarkable for a 22-minute episode of the Clone Wars to touch on and shade and show us new things about all 6 classic Star Wars movies. That's impressive.
Most impressive.
It truly is. And as we've talked now, and it makes me go back and watch it, because originally I knew it was a 1 episode thing, and I was like, oh, this will just be a throwaway episode maybe, or because I didn't know what was going to be about going in, and I was like, wow, this has a lot going for it for just 1 episode, and you hit just right, Bryan.
One of my favorite ones in the entire season, if not in the entire series.
Yeah, no, I think my favorite is still Duel of the Droids. I do love that one. I absolutely adore that episode, and I think that episode really gives me everything I wanted out of Anakin and Ahsoka, and that's the episode that made me really love their relationship.
That's cool. I still like the arc with the Void, which I know I'm like one of the. It seems like myself and Dan, but I
loved that arc too. I thought it was very THX 1138. It had all of these existential crises to it.
Yes, the idea of the nothingness with the mechanical droids. We could, if we went back and looked at some of these other episodes, that would be a fun one to discuss with you, because I think it's a brilliant one too.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. So just for curiosity's sake, I'm sure you got to go pretty soon, but You said we open up a bunch of other rabbit holes. Where would you jump into this rabbit hole if we were going to discuss those avenues?
Well, I think the rabbit holes though is who actually brings balance to the Force. I think everything.
Oh, it's got to be Anakin.
Well, I think it is, but I don't think even by tossing him into, I don't even think that by him tossing Palpatine down the reactor shaft of Death Star 2 is bringing balance to the Force.
Oh, I do.
Well,
tell me why you don't, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong. So that sounds like something. That's what Bryan said to us on
the Mortis trilogy. The Mortis trilogy. No, I said I'd take you to school.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
And I'm a rogue. So
yes,
there you go.
are. But I'm rogue leader.
But it's the Mortis trilogy. I honestly believe that Nexus of the Force, that was something bigger and outside the realm of anything that could be affected by a normal Jedi or a normal Sith. And that when they lost the mother and the son was jockeying for power, and that the mother, I still think that Talzin has something to do with that. She's some key to that.
Oh, that'd be cool.
And I think that Anakin's role was to stay there and become that conduit for that nexus in the Force, which would make perfect sense for him being created and conceived of the midichlorians. And I think that the balance of the Force has more to do with Mortis than how many Jedi or Sith there are.
That's fascinating.
So
I thought about it that way.
Why am I wrong?
Why are you wrong? It's not that you're wrong.
No, I'm curious. I want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're awesome. You obviously have your doctorate in Star Wars. This is one of the reasons why we had you on, of course, besides the fact that you're a lot of fun. But here's my opinion of this balance of the Force thing. And on the Cantina cast, they talked about this a lot too. To me, the reason that Anakin, Darth Vader, is able to restore balance to the Force is because true balance is equality across the board. And the dark side is so incredibly strong. They wipe out a lot of the good in the universe, or try to. They suppress people. They take away the element of choice from the people at large. So Anakin gets rid of the Emperor. That powerful puppet master is gone. Now good and evil can play on a balanced playing field. That is why I think balance is restored to the Force. How'd I do?
Well, it's hard to say you equal the number, because as soon as...
Well, it's not about equality numerically. It's not a quantitative measure so much as it's a qualitative measure.
But so if there's balance, though, then there's still a qualitative measure of evil.
You bet there is, but it's not so extreme in one direction, which of course poses the question: if good gets too good, does that mean the bad comes rising up? And the idea would probably be yes.
Yeah, I think you talk about balance and good and evil. So if there's a balance, there has to be equally good for equally bad. So there has to be bad out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, for Luke to throw Vader down the shaft, and I don't necessarily think that now the two bad guys are dead, we have balance again. I don't.
Well, balance doesn't mean you're eradicating evil. It just means that there's more of a natural order of things. The predator to prey ratio is more evened out.
Again, that's one of the things I loved about it. The whole series. People complain like George Lucas didn't know what he was talking about. He doesn't know what balance means. Why would Anakin bring balance to the Force? But Yoda brings up repeatedly, we could have misread this prophecy, guys.
True.
And he also says, like Qui-Gon says right at the beginning, his future's uncertain. You can't know that he's this problem. And Yoda says the same thing to Luke in Empire, although in Empire I think he might be placating him a little bit to try to get him to stay versus leaving. But Yoda says always in motion is the future.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I think Yoda's kind of keyed out. He's totally tuned out the idea that prophecies are a thing. And that goes one step further, though. Who made this prophecy? Why does anyone care about it?
Right. Well, that's what I love about it. It always comes back to me about free will versus determinism. And the prophecy is pretty much saying it's your destiny, it's unavoidable, this is going to happen. Luke brings in the notion of choice and free will, which is really what love is choice. It's knowing there are certain avenues out there, but you pick the right one that is right for you, and that's where love comes into play. Luke turns away from violence and embraces that love, which is what Yoda realizes throughout his arc as well.
And love is something even that's dangerous to the Jedi.
Yeah, exactly. Which, talk about a rabbit hole. So, Brian, how did I do?
I still don't think any of us know what the hell it's about.
Of course not.
You don't get a grade.
Yeah, no, we both got an incomplete on that one.
Well, guys, any last minute thoughts on this particular episode? We've covered it beautifully, I think, and very happy with our conversation. Hopefully the listeners are too. But any last minute thoughts on this?
I just think this was a really solid episode. It answered as many questions that we had before than it raised that we have now. And I think it really elegantly added to the tapestry of the Star Wars mythology.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think with all these episodes on season 6, every single one of them always, if they're just answering a lot of questions, tying up a lot of things, but also, putting more mysteries out there for us to examine and look at. And I think I was overwhelmed as far as it being one episode to hold all these different ideas and these different backgrounds, and I'm excited. It gets me excited for the last arc here with Yoda, and it gets me excited for Rebels too. I mean, it shows you the storytelling power that Dave Filoni and that crew had.
Yes,
and it's moving on into Rebels. I'm just really gets me excited for what they got ready for us next time.
Well, for the pocket of people who are Star Wars fans, like diehard Star Wars fans, like we all are, who have not yet embraced the Clone Wars, this is one of those episodes where I feel like you put this on and you've got complete buy-in, because the animation, the psychologically complex motivations and machinations of these characters, the incredible choreographed, beautiful lightsaber duel at the very end. Anakin, you see when he takes the necklace in the middle of this episode, he almost looks like he takes pleasure. He derives pleasure from using the Force. Like, hey, I'm going to one-up you. You're seeing those little tiny little pebbles in the ripple that turn him to the dark side. This is just a beautiful, as you said, tapestry that paints more of what's going on in the Star Wars universe. And this is why when I have debates with people who like Star Wars but don't love Star Wars, when they tell me it's kind of weak, the story's not that strong, damn, the characters aren't that strong, I would show them this, and I don't know how they could still maintain that particular dogma.
I'm the sort of guy who, like, every time I hear that, I'm like, well, let's have a little chat. And then I'll show them all the movies and sort of contextualize them. I don't know. Like, I think the reason people say that kind of stuff is that they haven't invested the
they haven't
energy.
Look, yeah.
They haven't invested the energy that I think Star Wars deserves. And if they don't feel like Star Wars deserves it, that's fine. It'll be lost on them anyway.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
But for those of you who sort of, for people who open themselves up to it, it's such a rich world, and it only gets richer. The reason that there are so many Star Wars podcasts out there, and the reason that, I mean, I've done hundreds of hours of Star Wars discussions on podcasts, and I'm not even close to running out of stuff to say.
Isn't that great? My wife says, what do you guys talk about? I'm like, oh, we haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's like, it doesn't matter how many times I do this. Like, even this episode, we've been talking for an hour, and it's like we could talk about this same subject and let it take us down the rabbit hole for another hour.
Easily. Because
we've invested that belief that Star Wars has something to offer us, and not just entertainment, but some sort of creative or emotional or spiritual or whatever sort of nourishment that you tap into. Star Wars has that to provide if you invest in it.
Very much. And we barely even scratched the surface of the political elements that are going on in this episode. And yeah, like you said, there are just so many different ways to look at it. The Star Wars in general, this episode, just the entire saga. And I'm with both of you. When people still say to me and they question George Lucas, the man was a visionary along the lines of the greats of all time. And I'm not just saying that because we're on a Star Wars podcast. It's he had a vision, he had a plan. He was very crafty in the way he built it together, reinventing it over and over again for different generations. The man's a living genius that I think we need to embrace.
I've been saying that for years.
Yeah.
So,
oh, yeah.
I'm on board with that. I endorse that plan fully.
There you go. So that's an A. Well, hey, Bryan, thank you again so much for having a couple of Clone Wars with us. Certainly, we hope to continually be in each other's rotations on podcasts and love talking Star Wars. And we've been saying this a lot lately, but it's certainly true here, too. We can't wait to shake your hand at Celebration.
Oh, Celebration's going to be a ball. I can't even wait. I can't. Have you guys been to Celebration before?
I went to Celebration 3 in Indianapolis.
Yeah. No, I've only missed Celebration 4. And I'll never miss another Celebration. They're the best.
Have you been to any of them in Europe or overseas?
I don't count those as actual celebrations just so I can feel good about myself.
In the continent.
Studies abroad, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Chewie, get us out of here!
If you would like to respond to our question of the show, have a comment, or just want to say hello, send us an email or MP3 at feedback@coffeewithkenobi.com. Or if you have a specific question or comment for either of us individually, email us at danz@coffeewithkenobi.com or coryc@coffeewithkenobi.com, or visit us at coffeewithkenobi.com and click on the Contact Us section, or comment on one of the stories featured on the site. If you enjoy the show, please write a review in iTunes. You can also like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/coffeewithkenobi, as well as keep up to date on our Twitter feed at twitter.com/coffeewithkenobi. You can also find us on Tumblr at coffeewithkenobi.tumblr.com. If you enjoy the jazz music, download the album Eye to Eye by Steve Torok on iTunes.
Give the evacuation code signal.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.